I thought everything else outside of me was the problem. I didn't realize the problem was me in here. So in Alcoholics Anonymous, in these 12 steps, we have a way out. It tells us here we have a solution, but we precisely follow the directions. So here we're hopelessly state of mind and body. And what's interesting to that, we'll get right into the doctor's opinion. So here, just on the first page here in the doctor's opinion, it explains what this program is all about. Not only to me does it explain what the program is all about, and I always say it's a simple program, and it's explaining to me the solution, because I couldn't find the solution until I realized where the problem was. And what it says in the middle of the page there, it goes, in the course of his third treatment, so Bill had gone into the Townsend Hospital, it was his third treatment there, he acquired certain ideas concerning a possible means of recovery. So we're talking here about certain ideas, and we're going to talk in the next page where they talk about the doctors and the scientists of the day and what they realized. And he says he acquired certain ideas. Certain ideas. What are your ideas about life? What are all our ideas about life? So here it's talking about and explaining to us. It's our perception, right, with life. So right here, I mean, on the first page, I'm reading this one paragraph here is explaining. It goes on to say, they must do likewise if they are to recover. You know, we're talking about that hopelessly sinking state of mind and body, which leads to the phenomenon of craving. This man and 100 others appear to have recovered. So in the beginning, they did this program, right? And then the first 100 wrote this book, along with Bill. Now, and the next, this is on page 20, Roman numeral 25, it says, I personally know scores of cases who were of the type with whom other methods had failed completely. Again, other methods had failed completely. In your life, have other methods succeeded or have they failed? I know my life, all the other methods, everything I tried, and we're going to talk about that a little bit here, failed. And not only with the addiction to alcohol, but with the steps talks about we have to get our life together and be joyous and happy and have that spiritual awakening. So it says, failed completely. And it goes on to say, with our ultra-modern standards and very scientific approach to everything, we are perhaps not well equipped to apply the powers of good that lie out of our synthetic knowledge. So here is a doctor talking about the scientists and the medical people at the time are admitting, or he's admitting that he saw that all the knowledge and everything from the time couldn't help in this addiction to alcoholism. Must be grounded in power greater than themselves if they are to recreate their lives. So right here we're talking about step one. Step one says we are powerless, over. So it says a power greater than ourselves. So ourselves couldn't do it, right? Our self-will can't do it. We're talking here about our addiction to alcoholism, but in step one, I place everything in there. It could be the way we run our lives, people, situations, our addiction to drugs, food, all of those different things. Must be grounded in power greater than themselves if they are to recreate their lives. And on the very bottom of the page, it explains, part of the problem here. It says, the very bottom says, they are restless, irritable, and discontented unless they can again experience the ease and comfort which comes at once by taking a few drinks which they see others take with impunity. So it's saying here pretty much that it's making alcohol our higher power, because it's saying our whole life and our whole dependence is upon the alcohol. This is our higher power, our God. It's something material, right? Alcohol, it could be other things, drugs, food, whatever it is. So here we realize that we can't run our life unless we have this addictive drug, the alcohol. But at the bottom of the first paragraph there, it says, unless this person can experience an entire, again, listen to these words, psychic change, there can be little hope of recovery. So until I realized, look, I came into these programs, I figured I could analyze my problems, I could figure it out, Alcoholics Anonymous meetings, that they could help me figure it out. All of these people, meetings, reading literature, the big book, all of this stuff that I did. But it's saying here that unless the person can have an entire psychic change. So that's what where the steps come in. That entire psychic change, which are in the steps. Because what does step 12 say? Having had that spiritual awakening. As I said, step 1 is admitting we're powerless, and we go through the first 3 steps. Step 4 is realizing our defects of character, the problems that are blocking out what they call the sunlight of spirit. So right here again, it's telling us the solution. And it says here, many types do not respond to ordinary psychological approaches. It says here, the phenomenon of craving at once becomes paramount to all other interests, so that the important appointment was not met. So again, our lives become centered on alcohol and alcoholism, and the whole problem is that our life becomes very narrow and finite, and this drug or alcohol controls us. And again, I can talk about, and we will touch upon other things in our life, whether it's people, situations, whatever it is, food and drugs, whatever. It's the same difference. And it says here, okay, this is really important. He accepted the plan outlined in his book, and then it tells what happened. And this is what the doctor says happened. He says, I knew the man by name and partly recognized his features, but that was all the resemblance ended. From a trembling, despairing, nervous wreck had emerged a man brimming over with self-reliance and contentment. Self-reliance and contentment, happy, joyous, and free. A man had a confidence, and this is what the spiritual awakening. And he's telling you, he didn't even recognize Bill because it was just so changed, a perception change. We always try to approach these addictions by trying to change everything out, trying to control it through self-will, or trying to change our situations, staying away, or all these different things. But here he had a complete psychic change. It says here we need a complete psychic change. Being reborn, as they say, right? Being reborn. So, but now it goes into Bill's story. So Bill's story, here we go. And on page 2, Bill says, I'll prove to the world I was important. So here Bill is into the self-reliance and the ego. And he wants to become a famous stockbroker. And at one point he wanted to become a famous golfer. Walter Hagen was a famous golfer at the time. So here we're starting. He's into the ego, into the self. So to move right ahead, okay, page 8 describes the problem, right? This is the way I was. A lot of people here can relate to this. On the first paragraph it says, no words, here's when he was into the addiction, no words can tell of the loneliness and despair I found in the bitter morass of self-pity. Here, see the word self in there? Ego, self. Quicksand stretched all around me in all directions. I had met my match. I had been overwhelmed. Alcohol was my master. So he made something his master, something material, something of the flesh. It was a drug, alcohol. We could do it with food, and we can do it with everything, a lot of things in our life. People, definitely. Okay, if you want more people to hear this message, press the like and subscribe button. The more people who press those buttons, the higher it gets ranked in YouTube, the more people hear the message. So if you like the message, it's like doing service, getting the message out there to other people by pressing those buttons. So he says here, trembling, I stepped from the hospital, a broken man. Fear sobered me for a bit. Then came the insidious insanity of the first drink. So he couldn't, the drink was everything to him, so he couldn't control it. So he had to have that first drink. But what does he say after that? He says, this is really interesting what he says here. Along to a miserable end, how dark it is before the dawn. You were talking about hitting bottom here. Bill finally hit bottom, right? And he's saying how dark it is before the dawn. In reality, that was the last beginning of my last debauch. I was soon to be catapulted in what I call the fourth dimension of existence. So here, right here, he's telling you the solution that we can have through working this program. Perception change about life. AA, attitude adjustment, working these steps, having that spiritual awakening. He was now in the fourth dimension. What does the fourth dimension means? He was no longer in those everyday things, that the resentment towards people. When we do the fourth step, we'll talk about that. Anger, all these 7 deadly sins. Bill actually talks about in the 12 and 12 that he wrote on page 48. And that's where the ego comes in, the envy, the lust, the jealousy. Pride is the number one. That has to do with the self. And he said he was catapulted in this other dimension. What he's sort of saying here, he says, I will know happiness and peace and a usefulness in a way of life that is incredibly more wonderful as time passes. Isn't that amazing? More wonderful as time passes, get better and better. We work these steps. Now, I go into a lot of AA meetings, Alcoholics Anonymous meetings, and a lot of people there, they talk about the pink cloud. And they say, well, I go in the program, and right away they're talking about their problem. They stop the drinking, and then they said, well, now I feel good, and they have this pink cloud. But then people say to them, it's not going to last, and a lot of times it doesn't. Because they're still in the material world. They're still trying to figure things out. They come to the meetings, talk about their problems, but here we have the solution. They figure, if I only ask this person, if I only ask my sponsor how to resolve this issue, or people in the rooms, I'll listen to them and they'll give me the answer to my problems. but it's saying here he was in the fourth dimension. That's still being in human dimension. When you're trying to figure it out and trying to ask people, or even reading 100 books, all these self-help books, it's all about the self. And then he had a solution, and the doctor talked about a spiritual solution. And hopefully we'll have it. If you haven't had it already, you'll have inklings of it now, or you'll have the spiritual solution. And he's telling you here, when you get out of the self, rocket in the fourth dimension, what is that saying? You're out of the time and space. The past is, I'm always planning the past. It's depression. The future is anxiety. Here we have a way through working these steps. 11 talks about prayer meditation. And 3 is faith, and 4 is faith, and 5, 6, and 7, that we don't do it anymore. We have a higher consciousness. So know peace and happiness and a useful way of life that's incredibly more important as time passes. It goes on to say, he had his friend come in, Ebby, right? And Ebby went through the same thing. Like the doctor saw Bill in the hospital, but on page 9, Bill found out his friend, he thought he was still a down and out drunk, but it turned out that Ebby, was in town, and he called Bill up, and they got a hold of each other, and he was coming over, and Bill figured he had a big bottle of booze there, and that they were just going to drink. He was going to have a great time getting out of his upset and depression by just drinking and talking to his friend. The door opened. There he stood, fresh skin and glowing. And remember what I read about in the doctor's opinion? So he says, there was something about his eyes. He was inexplicably different. What had happened? So in our lives, we can have that spiritual awakening. And it's going to tell you what happened here. And he asked Ebby straight out. Bill says, what happened? And Ebby gives him the answer. And he says, he looked straight at me, simply smiling. He said, I got religion. All right? We're talking here about religion and spirituality. He told a simple religious idea and a practical program of action, that how it had worked for him. So but on page 11, he also says, sat before me, and he made the point-blank declaration that God had done for him what he could not do for himself. His human will had failed. So the important thing here is that human will, self-reliance, making myself higher power, ego, easing God out, fails every time. I'm upset or miserable or something bothers me. It's because I'm taking my self-will back. When I'm out of the self, look, when you get out of the self, and it's, pride and the 7 deadly sins, the envy, the jealousy, pride is the number one. And the selfishness, self-centeredness, I'll read that in a minute in this book here. It talks about what the problem is. When you're out of the self, when I lose Bob, what is it to get upset about? 99% of our upset is with other people. So when we lose the self, it doesn't matter, because we're not relating to us. We're relating through God consciousness. He's talking about that spiritual awakening, having that source which is always in us. So this is where the steps come in the change of life. Again, working this program from this angle is the only angle. And they said precisely how we had recovered. And I know myself, when I first came in, I was trying everything else. I would call 10 people up, here's my problem. I would try to ask them how I could figure out the problem. I thought everything else outside of me was the problem. I didn't realize the problem was me in here. So in Alcoholics Anonymous, in these 12 steps, we have a way out. It tells us here we have a solution, but we precisely follow the directions. And what are the precise directions? Well, to give you a hint, it talks about a higher consciousness in nine times in the 12 steps. None of the steps say I can figure it out. My best thinking got me here. Think of it that way, right? It says at the bottom, it began to look as though religious people right after all. Do you realize billions of people in this world are spiritual through the ages? There's a reason. Because people realize that we take our, it's like the original sin. It's taking the self-will back, making it all about us. Again, so it all has to do with that. And this steps of deflation of the ego. That's what it really is. And the way to do it is to have faith in a higher consciousness. To me, it's always been in there. I was creating God's image. So, and then I can stay away from my addictions because, they call alcohol spirits, right? So I was trying to find that spiritual release in the alcohol and the drugs and other things like food or whatever it is. My addiction also to being successful, money, and getting people to like me. It all has to do with all the same thing. On page 12, in the middle, it was only, the word only, I always say this is a simple program, a matter of being willing to believe in a power greater than myself. So right here, it's giving you the solution. Almost every paragraph here does. But how many times, people could be in these meetings 10, 20, 30, 40 more years, and they didn't want to take this into their heart. It's telling us the solution here. But when you hear people share and or talk about what their daily problems are, being in the problem, not the solution, did they really say they have a belief in a higher power? No, we're still trying to make ourselves that higher power, trying to resolve it. And look, I always find when I go to that source, that higher power, higher consciousness, I realize I have no problems. That's what I find out. That there really aren't problems, because the only problems we have is because in our brain we think it's all about us. And when we get out of the self, things change and it doesn't matter. And then we can have joy and happiness. It even says further down, at long on page 12, I saw and felt, I believe, scales of pride and prejudice fell from my eyes. This is the way he observed the world, through his eyes. So the world was, he observed it in his mind. That's the way we all look. The world is what we think. That's really what it is. It's our perception. 95% of your problems is your perception towards them. So he's saying these scales and pride were lifted from his eyes. So he had a new perception, a new way of thinking, new pair of glasses, right? As you hear people say. So he's telling you the solution. I don't know how much more they can tell us, even in these first few pages of the book. Look, the book is 600 pages. Not only that, I had shelves full of self-help books, religious, I don't know, all kinds of Eastern, Western philosophy. You know, all the ancient philosophers, whatever it was, never helped. Here it's talking about having faith in a higher power, consciousness, that getting out of the self. When I did all those intellectual, people have their PhD in philosophy, but if you're still trying to figure it out, you're still trying to figure it out. You hear people, big philosophical people talking. This is something you can't do. You can't work at getting happy, but it could be there. That's where you lose it, when you try to find these things. It's telling you, in a moment of inspiration, a spiritual awakening. On page 13, there, he's doing the steps. Actually, page 13. You know, some of us do the steps for years. Bill did them in one afternoon with Ebby. But of course, this is what he did. He took it into his heart. There I offered myself to God, as I then understood him, to do with me as he would. It's like you're in a limousine and the driver's driving in the car, the limo, and you could just sit back and relax. But no, what we do is we're trying to do the brake, watching where the driver's going, trying to steer the car. Backseat driver. Okay, so anyway, we're going to talk today. Like, here's they had this, it's really interesting. They had the anniversary, Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, through prayer and meditation. So we got to step 4, right? We look at our defects of character. And then we have here the 12 and 12 traditions and 12 steps, written by Bill. I also have, there's a few books that we have, but here's another book. Dr. Bob in the Good Old Times talks about the history of AA and what's going on with that. And then there are meetings. Okay. So here I got some here. Meetings, don't forget. There are meetings, and the big book, the history we're going to discuss. The 12 steps, that's the whole thing of the program. And meditation, prayer and meditation, right? So through prayer and meditation.